Howdy everybody, this is Susan and I am here to give you some of the tips and tricks that we shared with the group yesterday when we did our first Duffers class at our fiber gathering. And for those of you who weren't able to make it, I'm sorry about the Wi-Fi issues, but I promised that I would supply you with this information that we supplied them with yesterday, and hopefully that'll help you as it helped the other folks yesterday. A couple of things that you're going to need for knitting these slippers. Obviously you're going to need your pattern, so go get that if you don't have it, and we're going to make some notations on it that I think you're going to find really helpful. The other thing you're going to need is knitting needles. You're either going to need straight needles or circulars in the size appropriate. US 11 is probably the best. I have done them on 10.5s, but you'll want to knit really loosely with a 10.5, or you could go up to a size 13 if you wanted to try and increase the pattern, stretch it a little bit so that it would be for a bigger foot. The important thing is you don't want to knit too tight a fabric, because if you do, then the yarn doesn't have any place to go during the agitation process, which is vital to welding the fibers together to make an impermeable felted fleece for your footwear. So that's going to be really important. The other thing you're going to need is some little O scissors or some big O scissors, whichever works for you. These are small enough that I can't hurt myself too bad. You also need some stitch markers. We're going to need at least 2 stitch markers for this. Something that's big enough to slide over your needle. It can either be a plastic ring, it can be a piece of yarn that you've tied into a little O circle, a wedding ring you're not using anymore, or one of these pretty fancy jewelry. Can you see that? It's like a snowflake. Jewelry kind of stitch markers, which I'm addicted to buying. My husband will tell you. You also want something like this here. It's a big old safety pin. This is going to help with an issue I have trouble with, so which is sort of abstract thinking and structure. So I need this to kind of keep me oriented sometimes. You also need some kind of way of marking your rows, either with a pencil, or you can use sticky notes and little hash marks, or an actual row counter, something you can punch a button on. It'll keep track of your rows. You're also going to need a needle for stitching up. This is a stitching up needle, embroidery needle. I think that's what they call it. It's kind of blunt. They can be plastic or metal, and they've got a great big eye so that your yarn can pass through there. So you're going to need those things. Right off the bat, the first thing you got to do is determine what size slipper that you're going to be knitting. I'm going to be knitting the largest size, so I'm going to go through here, and the largest size, that number is going to be the last number that's listed in that group of 3. Small is going to be first, and outside of the parentheses, inside of the parentheses, is going to be the medium and then the large. So do yourself a favor, grab yourself a pencil and circle the number that's appropriate for your size on that cast on instruction, that very first instruction. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to take your pencil and go down to row 3. And on row 3 you see it says knit 1, make 1. Make 1 is going to be something that we'll cover in another video, or I'll send links to a couple of really good videos, way better videos than I could ever make, on how to make a stitch out of thin air. This isn't going to be the knit through the front and back loop. You may have used that in some other patterns, but don't use that one here. It's going to throw the stitch counts all off if you do. So you'll be using either a loop cast on, a thumb loop cast on, a reverse loop cast on, or you can do the lifted bar increases. But the backwards cast on with the thumb is the easiest one, and it works great in here. So that would work just fine. So what I like to do is I go through, and under that make 1, I'll make 2 little underline marks so as to catch my attention and let me know that I need to pay attention to what's happening here and do it right. Then you'll go down to where it says make 1 again, and I'll draw 2 little lines under there. because that's kind of something out of the ordinary. And then all of a sudden I've got that knit 2. Well, that knit 2 right there in the middle of that algebraic equation called row 3 is the midpoint of the toe. And so I think it's a really good idea, at least it really helps me, to, once I get to that point, I'm going to knit 1, and then I'm going to place my marker, my midpoint marker, and then I'm going to knit 1 on the other side of it, and then proceed with the knit, with the make 1, the knit 30, the make 1, the knit 1 to finish that row out. So this is just kind of what's going to mark the midpoint of that center of the toe, and that's going to help keep me on track, so I can never get so far off that I only have to go back half the slipper to fix my problem. So I would highly recommend that. So I just take my pencil, and between the K and the 2, I draw a line, and I'll knit 1, place the marker, knit 1, and combine that together, I've got knit 2. But that stitch marker in the middle of it is really, really important. You'll also notice that at the end of each row there's a stitch count, and that's really going to be helpful to tell you how many stitches you should have at the end of knitting that row. So for the instance, at the end of row 3, I, the large size, will have knitted 68 stitches. So that will tell me right off the bat if I'm on track, off track, and I can kind of guess where I went off track. The other thing is you'll notice that in row 2 and all even rows in the slipper base are knitted. So what I did when I first began using this pattern was I went through, and between row 3 and 5 I wrote the words row 4 knit, and then between row 5 and 7 I wrote the words row 6 knit, and then between 7 and 9 I wrote row 8 knit. Don't write row 10 knit at the bottom of this page, because when you flip to the bottom, when you flip this pattern over, you're not going to be working on the bottom of your foot anymore. You're going to be working on the sides of your slipper. And if you change colors, that's where you'll want to change colors. So don't write row 10 on this. When you flip the page over, ta-da, you finish the base of your slipper, and now you are knitting the sides of your slipper. So whenever you go to the second page, you're going to do basically the same thing. You're going to go through, circle your size stitches, and then I like to draw like 3 lines under a knit 3 together to remind me I need to use 3 stitches there. And under an SSP, I'm going to draw 2 lines because it's 2 stitches I'm going to utilize there. Then that knit 8 that shows up in the middle of rows 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 17, 18, and 19, I'm going to draw a line between the K and the 8 or the P and the 8, and that will tell me that I need to, when I get up to almost that stitch marker, I'm coming up on that midpoint stitch marker. If the instructions say knit 3 together, knit 8, I'm going to know I'm going to need to knit 3 together and then knit 4 individual stitches, slip my marker, knit 4 more stitches, and then SSSK on this other side. That way I have a mirror image and my toe comes out absolutely even. Otherwise, it's kind of easy to get off track, and your toe may have more stitches on one side and it gets shifted over, and it's just a big old mess. So putting those stitch markers right in that midpoint of that toe really helps. Remember this safety pin I was telling you about? It helped me when I first started knitting this slipper, because it don't look like a slipper. When you first knit it, it kind of looks like a big old banana, and as they would say in Sling Blade. But anyway, what I do is I put this marker or safety pin, and I put it kind of in the middle of a toe, because this tells me this is the outside of my material. Otherwise, I could lay this down, come back, and Lord knows where I would pick up and what I would do with it when I first started making these. Now I know better. But it does help me, and I've even put a little old paper tag on here that would say front center of toe, because not everything is intuitive to a new knitter or somebody who hasn't knit with a particular type of pattern. So that's kind of what I do there. So after you have gotten down to your pattern, through your pattern a little bit, like to row 16, I draw a big line between row 16 and 17 on account I've been kind of relaxing and I think I know what I'm doing, and all of a sudden things change. And when they change, it can throw you off if you're watching Blue Bloods or Outlander whatever it is you're watching on TV, a Hallmark channel, you can kind of get lost in your knitting and think you know what's coming up next. And if you get to row 17 and 18 and you've been continuing the way you were before, you're going to be wrong. You're going to be sad, and you're going to be mad at me that I didn't tell you to draw a line between rows 16 and 17. So draw a line and write the word things change. That's what I do. So there on row 17, what I do is I go under that SSP and draw me 2 little underlines. Then I get to the SSP and draw 2 little lines. I get to the P8, draw my line between P and 8, because that means 4 over here, center stitch here, 4 over here, and then proceed on. It just keeps me on track and reminds me I'm supposed to do something different than I'm kind of normally doing. So that's kind of how you want to mark up this pattern. I think it really helps. It says down here, optional rows 20 and 21. I don't think they're really optional at all. It says if you want a deeper sides to your slipper and a deeper toe, you want to add those 2 rows. Some people even add 2 more. But I knit rows 20 and 21, or you knit row 20 and you purl row 21. And what that does is it makes that slipper come up more over the top of your foot and over your toes. Otherwise you get kind of a little bit of a shallow sort of a slipper that's more likely to pop off. And during these Minnesota winters, we don't want no slippers popping off. So, so do rows 20 and 21. That's just my recommendation. Then you're going to want to bind off. And when you bind off, you want to leave yourself, you want to cut yourself enough of a tail so that you can bind off in the color that you want to bind off. For instance, I left myself a pretty good tail, green tail, well, a short green tail, I should say, because well, it's a long story, but I did it a little bit differently for you guys. So this is not at quite enough tail to do everything that you want to do if it was a 1-color slipper, because you're going to seam up, after you bind off, you're going to seam up the back of your slipper, that heel part, and then on down around all the way up to the toe. You can cut other pieces of yarn. It's not the end of the world if you don't have enough yarn, but you know, you can make better use of your skein yarn if you leave an adequate tail to seam up with. We're going to be talking about like I said, I'll make some notations and post some YouTube links to some of the more specialized stitches, the make ones, the SSP, that sort of thing, so that you can do it just the way they want you to do it. And then we will be making another video on how to felt and full these boogers. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, oh, I was going to show you, these things are going to be huge when you get them done. They're huge. I mean, they look like Paul Bunyan slippers, but the good news is they're going to felt down. So one thing I want you to do before you felt it is I want you to measure it. And however you measure, I tend to measure, I make a measurement from the middle part of the sole to the back of the heel. That's one measurement. And then I make a measurement from the furthest back of the heel to the tip of the toe. And then I make a measurement from the top of the tongue. Is that a tongue? Is that tongue? Top of the tongue of the foot down to the middle bottom of the sole. And then that tells me, after I fold it and put them on my feet, where I might improve my slipper count, row count, to make a more customized fitting slipper. I may decide it's too tall. I may decide it's too shallow. I may decide it's too long, it's too short, it's too wide, it's not wide enough. Those measurements are going to help me know, because for when the next time I knit this, and there will be a next time, I will adjust it accordingly. So be sure you get yourself some really, really good measurements before you full it. Once you full it, it's too late. Or in full felt, I have to explain that to you, that true felting is binding fibers that are not knitted. They're loose fibers. And fulling is welding those fibers, but they're yarns and they're in a knitted state or a woven state to begin with. So it's a technical things. Some people get really hung up on it, so I try to use felting and fulling, felting/fulling. So you'll know what I'm talking about, but you know. Anyway, so that's all for right now. I hope that made sense. I hope I didn't talk too fast. But I will look forward to seeing your slippers when you get them done. No question is a bad question or a stupid question. I've asked all the stupid questions. So please feel free to ask questions on the comment section. We look forward to talking to you guys and seeing pictures of your work. And thank you so much for participating. You're a great group of people, and I sure do love you. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you soon. Happy knitting.